Mars, the real Dune. Mars. So you name it, and think that you know it? The red planet. No air, no life. But you do not know Mars, for its true name is Dune. And it is not airless, nor is it dead. In truth, Mars is a mystical place with a deep history and role in the battle for the human race. It has been fought over many times by forces both good and evil, and has always been central to controlling the fate of Earth. Many have been involved in the battle for Mars and that of the human continuum at large, which has mostly centered around our own solar system. This battle has taken many physical forms, but has mainly been the result of the war between El and Ra over control of the universe in the distant past. There are 4 distinct eras of conflict on Mars: ultra-ancient, super-ancient, ancient, and modern. Mars is essentially the closest world to Earth that can be traversed reasonably and is therefore one of the most important locales within our solar system. Holding Mars has always been key to holding control of the solar system in general, and there have been many incantations of this fight. Civilization of the distant future, that oversees and administers all time periods, had to coordinate across time for a vast war effort to maintain human dominance and our successful development. People from our own modern era were exported and transposed to participate in extratemporal activities. Or in other words, were taken and returned at the end of a purposely formed loop in time. Many of them have been, or are, in 2 places at once, which allowed people to be freed up for long periods to fight off-world, even within time frames when they were already living on Earth. Because Federation administration always had known about the star seeds, and the coming need for the 144,000 to be taken in and sent to the past, they had been administering and connecting various time periods artificially. Many of the 144,000 were involved in various programs and efforts as part of their mission, culminating in their eventual exodus into the distant past by hundreds of millennia to become the founders of the Galactic Federation. The 144, as they have been called, are those charged with the greatest level of defense of the human continuum, also known as the Realm, and lead the charge against Ra in the super-ancient era for control of Earth. They are led by the Metatron, who is El, believed by the Federation's founders to be the chosen physical form of God. He is the only one of the 144 that leads the effort from the end, and comes to recruit himself, and his younger self works for and takes orders from his eldest self of the distant future. When the Metatron was taken in by the Asgard and first taken to join the Mars Defense Forces for Operation Solar Guardian, he was recruited by another him, an older him, that was time-traveling throughout the timeline administering the war effort in various eras. That younger El started out as a soldier for the MDF, before ascending the ranks and then being sent into the distant past to fight Ra's Ennead Empire and found the Galactic Federation. The Metatron is what modern theologians and religions have been referring to as Jesus. Yes, that is correct. Part of Jesus's modern life is to lead the battle for humanity, starting with the outer wars on Mars, and moving on to the wars in the distant past against Ra over the fate of Earth. The Children of Doom. Do you feel an instinctive connection to Mars? Do you find yourself fascinated with the red planet? Do you feel as if you've already been to Mars, or part of a Mars colonization effort? You are not alone. In fact, more and more are now surfacing as time unfolds, and more that were involved with the exterior part of the program have been having a pre-programmed recall, which is a fail-safe in the eventuality of the need to reactivate. It indicates that there is a threat posed to Earth in some form that was known about by extratemporal forces who knew of the need to make use of the Mars crew within our immediate time frame. Many have been taken and dispersed throughout the timeline, connecting with our own groups permanently sent to those periods from the 144, to join the battles taking place there. In the ultra-ancient era, the battle on Mars was against several non-human races that derived from transhumanists like the Greys, reptiles, and insects, highly intelligent and technologically advanced. In that era, both sides mostly avoided Earth in hopes of having control of it at the end of the war. Federation forces took control of a fifth small rocky planet orbiting between Mars and Jupiter called Lyra, that was very much like Earth of the modern day. Mars of that era, approximately 4 million years in the past, was much more alive and warm. After millennia of fighting over control, Lyra was destroyed by the Alien Alliance, and Mars was laid waste in the meteor storm that followed. Closer to our era, the true beginning of the wars for Mars was during the final campaign of the Star Wars, approximately 190,000 years ago, becoming the Super Ancient Era. By that time, Ra had emerged from the distant future, established a small intergalactic empire and had already constructed pyramid complexes on Earth, Mars, and several other moons within our solar system. It took the 144, who established the Celestial Federation, almost 10,000 years to fight their way across the universe to liberate Earth. During that battle, the Celestials and Ra's forces fought throughout our solar system, and a major engagement occurred at Mars. Ra had built a large pyramid-structured citadel there as a command center for his forces in our system. Ra's side used the name Rius for Mars. When the war spread to Mars, Ra took refuge at the citadel, called Cydonia, while Mars had been shielded by a massive planetary energy shield. The Celestials used large asteroids, which had turned out to be remnants of the planet Lyra, and hurled them at Mars to overwhelm the enemy's energy shield, and allow for sieging Ra's bases there. Their plan succeeded but led to the last Martian cataclysm that stripped a great deal of atmosphere from Mars and desolated the surface. The last of the remaining liquid water on Mars froze and was buried in the upheaval from the meteor bombardment. During the bombardment, the Federation super troopers, white-armored super soldiers, flew down to Cydonia and stormed the base while the meteor storm they caused slowly engulfed the surface. As a tsunami of debris and sand swept across the planet, they engaged the last of Ra's guard forces at the base of the pyramid complex there, storming the base in an effort to capture or kill Ra. Ra escaped but the base was captured and buried over with a thick layer of sand and dust, after several of the pyramids were destroyed. After the battle, El placed the face edifice adjacent to the citadel at Cydonia, which was the faceplate of the Federation Super Trooper's helmet, which greatly resembled that of the Stormtrooper from the Star Wars franchise. In fact, it was no coincidence that the Viking probe sent back pictures of Cydonia only a year before the release of the first Star Wars film, which contained a great deal of symbology and analogous scenarios of the real ancient intergalactic wars. It was these events that earned Mars its original celestial name Doom, as it was a place of doom for Ra and his once mighty empire. Almost 200 millennia after that, and a long era of peace where Cydonia remained abandoned as a relic of ancient wars, Ra's second attempt at dominating Earth finally ended, and he was forced to flee again to Cydonia at Mars. This became the Ancient Era, where for 5,000 years after the destruction of Atlantis, Ra had secretly reactivated Cydonia and used it as a secret base to influence Earth and remain in hiding while his sympathizers in the Galactic Federation's Council of Light pursued the legal recognition of Ra's authority over Earth and the Federation. Finally El, who acted on his own authority, found Ra and took his own city ship Elysium there to destroy Ra's presence. El again led an armed force of troopers in to assault the base, but Ra used paranormal abilities to learn about the attack as Elysium prepared for it, and made one last escape back to Earth, where he finally remained trapped. Cydonia again was captured and neutralized, and abandoned once the battle was over. But El could not simply assert open control in that era, or it would have caused a civil war within the Galactic Federation, so they withdrew and waited. In the years afterwards, Mars was avoided as a place of doom, a former bastion for the dark forces, a dangerous desert best avoided, reinforcing the name Doom throughout the Federation. For most of the next 6 millennia, the battle shifted to a war of influence on Earth. The return to Doom. In the modern era, the conflict over Mars was far from over. During Ra's second reign on Earth, he had been helped by a species of reptilian bipeds that were created by him during the founding wars, hundreds of millennia earlier, called the Dracos, also known as the Draconians, Dragos, Dagos, Dagons, etc. They helped to occupy Earth with Ra and were used as an occupation force to enslave local humans for tens of thousands of years. After the fall of Atlantis, they left Earth and served Ra on Mars. When Cydonia was sieged a second time, over 6,000 years ago, some of the Dracos survived in pockets and remained on Mars. As the millennia passed, more parties sympathetic to Ra emerged to intervene on his behalf, such as the Greys, a group of extreme transhumanists that recognized Ra's authority over the Federation and claims of godhood. By the 15th century AD, both groups had established themselves on Mars, and were actively working to provide counter-pressure for Ra against anyone who would oppose him in the galactic government. It was around that time that El emerged openly, revealing his return to the galactic government and peoples of the Federation, and assumed direct control of the Federation. With the change in Umbrella, forces loyal to Ra became even more brazen and disruptive of human affairs, maintaining a centuries-long threat to openly attack and destroy civilization on Earth if any attempt is made to reveal the truth to humanity. This led to the modern era's conflict over Mars. By the end of the 20th century, forces loyal to El within the Federation became aware that the Greys and Dracos were operating on Mars, the Moon, parts of Earth, and elsewhere in the outer solar system. In coordination with Federation forces, an effort began to counter Ra's efforts within the modern day. Especially due to the standoff within the galactic government, forces from Earth of various time periods were assembled to form an army and fleet to be used to secure Earth and our solar system ourselves, to hold Ra's forces at bay as long as possible. It became known that in a previous timeline when Earth's space forces joined with civilizations like the Asgard, it would lead to war where Ra's forces would prevail. This is why the future Federation oversees the direct assembly of the 144, and sends them into the past with their own advanced city ship. These people are the most involved in every level of the Earth defense program. This effort has had many sub-programs, such as Project Pegasus, Operation Solar Guardian, Operation Solar Warden, and involves making use of bases and technology strictly kept quarantined from Earth and its surface civilization. This brings us to the recent battles for Mars. By the 1960s it was evident that alien forces were operating in our system and on Earth directly in efforts to undermine our development. Preliminary efforts were made to begin scouting Mars, which led to the development of a secret space program within the US that began the establishment of a small manned outpost on Mars using mostly conventional means by the 1970s. By the 1980s it was determined that the Greys and Dracos had agents and a secret space program of their own within the US mega-bureaucracy, and the Federation decided to give more direct assistance to Earth's free civilizations. Essentially under the auspices of NATO/NORAD, a multinational force was assembled off-world beginning on the Moon, where they were then sent to Mars to begin the establishment of 5 fully manned colonies, far more advanced than the original manned outpost. These forces were given access to anti-gravity contained fusion power generation, advanced energy field projection technology, and anti-gravity field drive capability. A small but advanced force emerged that began operating to secure the space and terrain of the inner solar system from exterior threats, called the Earth Defense Forces. It was during this time that pockets of humans that had been surviving on Mars for thousands of years, since before the last battle at Cydonia 6,000 years ago, were discovered as descendants of slaves from the last stretch of Ra's dominance of Earth. Ra had brought human slaves to Mars in the distant past, when Mars had been more habitable still, albeit barely survivable even by that era. When Ra fled Cydonia that last time to Giza, and the base was abandoned, some of the humans that were still on Mars fled and were forgotten for millennia. They survived mostly underground but could travel the surface in warm zones near the equator. They also had discovered an ancient tunnel system that remained from Ra's first era on Mars, that connected parts of the surface via an underground network. This allowed them to travel about the planet without the need to expose themselves during the coldest times of year. When the Mars Defense Forces formed and began operating, they had been in limited contact since the 1970s. It was then that they began making efforts to help them survive, bring some of them into their care, and joined forces with them to work against the alien presence that was back to operating there. By the mid-90s these 5 colonies were well established and running before they discovered the Greys/Dracos presence on Mars as well. It did not take them long to learn that their operations were centered out of Ross' old complex, beneath Cydonia. It was also during this era that Terran forces discovered the presence of an ancient insect species that became nicknamed roaches, that proved to be a formidable foe and dangerous presence. The insect had been part of the ancient ecosystem on Mars but was relatively ignored in ancient ages. As both sides spanned out to occupy more of the surface of Mars, they both became hindered by the populations of the insect, a social form of giant carnivorous locusts, that had survived underground. This became a major problem and proved to complicate the battle scenario that was developing there for years. Although of marginal intelligence, instinctive defensive mechanisms such as territorialism still proved to provoke the insect into a combative reaction. It made attempting to mine or establish new colonies impossible for some time. Eventually by the late 2000s a genetic solution was introduced and the species was eradicated. Yet during the late 90s and early 2000s, as the new Earth Defense Forces, and Mars Defense Forces, went to work fighting the alien presence on Mars, the battle was greatly against the insect life form, that is until the major offensive of 1999 where a final overt attack was launched against Cydonia. The Mars Defense Forces moved into the area and established a base of operations east of the ancient celestial face on Mars, and then went to work establishing many more smaller outposts in an effort to begin denying terrain to the enemy, with intelligence provided by the local human survivors. However, this began a months-long exchange where the Terrans, aliens, and roaches conflicted over control of the Cydonia plateau. Eventually Terran forces prevailed, as well as on the Moon and Earth, in routing the last of the Alien Alliance bases. By early 2001 most of the engagements on Mars had wrapped up. As the decade unfolded, the EDF also continued to expand its area of operations outwards, and Mars served as a main base of operations for offensive operations in the outer solar system. The battles spread to the moons of several of the gas giants, and planetoids scattered around our solar system. Few actual ground battles occurred after that, but Mars now played the role of interplanetary airfield for advanced craft to deploy from that could fly to anywhere in our solar system in reasonable time to attack any enemy alien presence they would detect. By the 2010s the solar system had been brought under control, and it turned out that was the easy part. The hardest part of the battle for humanity would be in maintaining control of Earth itself. During the phase that started at the beginning of the 1980s, what others have said about the Mars operation is true. The secret private entity has existed since then called the MCC, or Mars Colony Corporation, that was the service provider and manufacturer for the Mars colonies, such as Ares Prime. This expanded to become the Greater International Colony Corporation, or ICC, as the years progressed. The ICC as a conglomerate owns and controls many corporations known well around the world in various eras. During these years, the competing secret space programs within the U.S. military-industrial complex were attempting to establish bases on Mars and other places in the solar system. After the fall of Ross' last forces, these programs were amalgamated, at least outside of Earth. Back on Earth, however, Ross forces went deeper underground within the military and corporate establishment, and made use of the 9/11 attacks to grab onto a great deal of power in secret, despite their losses out in space. It was during this era that they formed what became known as the Global Cabal, a loose network of governments loyal to their vision of a new world order, a transhumanist technocracy loyal to Ra. From Dune to Earth, the final battle. Both sides had tried to control Mars via force and then later through government and corporate influence, and Ross forces tried to assert control again via the government. Yet because of the secret nature of the programs, they only had limited ability to enforce rules, and they still had to maintain a plausible cover to most within the military. Still, by the 2016 election, the battle for Mars within this era was concluded, and most had moved on to join the 144 and move into the distant past with their city ship Home 1, that was provided by the last remaining Agar thence, called the Asgard. Ironically, many who eventually fought on Mars during the first Star Wars had already fought their first battles there in the future, what we consider the modern age. Now that the influence of Ra, the Dracos and Greys has been diminished and they can no longer send any real resources or vessels to affect Earth, the Galactic Federation has begun the final phase of disclosure, before any more actions can be taken by global cabal saboteurs on Earth that would act to delay such a development. Recent events have indicated that no further assistance can reach the transhumanist Ra sympathizers on Earth, and this now allows for the Federation to move in to assert dominance. People on Earth that have been a part of the exterior fight, from Starseed/Indigos/Psychics, and the 144, are here as part of the great mission to lead humanity into the next age. The Metatron is here on Earth, now, in the modern era, and the next round of the battle for humanity is about to begin. As governments on Earth that are opposed to disclosure are considering using force to remain dominant and retain power globally, forces of the Galactic Federation are making it clear that they control Earth's airspace, and unlike after the COVID-19 epidemic, will not be waiting for much longer to proceed with the next phase of disclosure. Should these anti-human and transhuman sympathizers attempt to retain power, many of the aforementioned groups will be activated. Once the shift away from cabal governments has been completed, humanity will finally have the resources freed within our time period to end world hunger and poverty, and begin the open colonization of Mars and our solar system. It appears that the Mars core may need to fight one last battle here on Earth, to achieve ultimate victory in the battle for the realm in this era. Now that the real awakening has begun, that battle is about to begin.